later on use this. If anyone doesn't want to be on the recording, just please close your camera. We, even so, just to be clear, the recording will focus on the people who are speaking. So you won't be on screen if you're not talking. Okay, so welcome all of you. To make a small introduction, all of the groups I previously mentioned, from Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico, we are all part of Global Jews for Palestine. Global Jews for Palestine is a network that is currently in 20 countries with more than 25 groups. Some countries have more than one group affiliated to Global Jews. And this is an international network of Jewish anti-Zionist groups that are in solidarity with Palestine, that defend the right for the Palestinian people to resist and to make their own decisions. And we all defend the right of return for the displaced Palestinian people from all times. So, and we've been working worldwide with people and groups from the US, Canada, Spain, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa, and many other countries. And our goal is to put up a global fight against Zionism and against Israel crimes, and to support the Palestinian struggle for the right to exist and to live. Just as a small introduction as well, we here in Argentina, as Judíes por Palestina, we formed ourselves as a group in May 2021. And all these 4 years, we've been trying here in Argentina to fight back, to support our Palestinian and Arab colleagues and comrades. And we've been organizing all sorts of activities, such as this one, and participating in demonstrations, and working, also collaborating with the legal defense in many cases where Zionist institutions prosecute and try to silence and to get people who are denouncing Israel's crimes. They're trying to make them shut up with legal cases. So we're also working against the instrumentalization of anti-Semitism. We do care a lot about anti-Semitism, but we don't agree with the use of it that is Israel doing, um, in order to to cover up for everything Israel is doing in Gaza, the West Bank, and all the Middle West. I don't know, Juliana, if you want to continue, or Isa, right? Isa, I'm, yeah.
Thanks, Ivan. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Isadora. I am from Brazil. I'm from São Paulo. We are part of a collective called Vozes Judaicas por Libertação, or Jewish Voices for Liberation. We are a collective since November 2023. We have known each other. Some of us, we have done some stuff since 2014, but we are organized as a collective since 2023. So we are a very recent collective. Uh, we are one of the first collectives, anti-Zionist collectives in Brazil since our dictatorship. It's not, we are not a big community of Jews here in Brazil. Nonetheless, the community of anti-Zionist Jews, so we are not a huge collective, but we are a very important one. We are only in São Paulo, unfortunately. We see some comrades from Rio de Janeiro, like Silvio here, and we hopefully in a few years we will be able to expand across our very large country. We have some uh, important agendas for us. First, we are part of the Palestinian movement. So we join forces with the Palestinian activists in the Palestinian front of São Paulo. We have been working towards a different definition of anti-Semitism rather than IRA here in Brazil, because it's also something that has been adopted in most of our governments. We join a debate on military embargo on Israel from Brazil and how it impacts Brazil as well, and not only Palestine. And we are also very concerned about joining and creating anti-Zionist networks across Brazil, across Latin America, and across, well, we are part of Global Jews as well, so across the world. But as of right now, we are like doing our best as a very small group. We are very happy to be here. We have watched Israelism here in São Paulo 2 or 3 times in public debates. Also, we went to Rio to debate. So it's an honor to be here to listen to Erin and be able to share this space with our comrades from across Latin America. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. Bem-vindos.
So now, everyone, thank you, Ivan, thank you, Isa. So now, Erin, I
Wait,
would
wait.
like. Sorry.
Just one moment. I don't know if Micaela or Gabriela or
Okay,
from
perdón.
Mexico wants to go first. Let's see.
Yes. Hello, everybody. There are more members here. We are Jews for a Free Palestine from Mexico. We have members that are also in the other Mexican group, AMHI, which maybe later Gabi or Runit or someone else can tell you about it. We are a community of anti-Zionist Jews. Some of us are Mexican and some of us come from different countries but live in Mexico. We are, as everybody here, I think, advocating for both the decolonization and the immediate end of the genocide and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. We do different activities here in Mexico. We are also a young organization. We exist since the year 23. And yeah, we are figuring out a way to collaborate with the other groups. We also have like an artistic Doikite group that is also doing things. We do screenings, we do theater, we attend the marches, and we try to develop our content. And we are trying to figure out a way from Mexico to help our common cause. We are happy and proud to be part of Global Jews and to meet you all. And thank you, Erin, for this today. And thank you. That's it.
Just one moment, Gabriela, because you're not on the English channel. Just 1 second.
I think.
Okay, now go.
Now, so I speak in English and it will be translated into Spanish, right? Yes. Thank you, everybody. So I am presenting AMHI, Agrupación Mexicana de Judíes Interdependientes, which has a complicated name, but it takes the name from a group that existed in the 80s that was doing the same thing after Sabra and Shatila. And we, as our sister, brother, sibling group, JPL, we are in Mexico, and we are also doing basically the same things, but we are 2 groups. And I won't add anything else, so we can go on to the presentation. Maybe we can add that we organized a screening, in-person screening of two in-person screenings of Israelism in Mexico. Hi, Erin, it's very nice to see you again. And it was a very important and successful event, and we're very happy to do it again with our collectives from Latin America, and to have this audience and this chance to talk again after more than a year. So very excited to be here, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Gabriela. Tania from Chile.
Hola, buenos días. Estoy con un tema acá de internet, por eso no activo la imagen. Mis disculpas por no tener la cámara
Tania,
encendida.
can we do English?
Okay, no problem. I'm sorry for not having my camera on because I'm having some troubles with my internet signal. First of all, thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Erin, for having you with us today again. We're very happy for the many people interested of participating here today, and we hope to organize more activities in Latin America, Spain, Portugal, and all the groups for global Jews for Palestine, together growing each day more and hoping that here in Chile, of course, more Jews join to us, to judíos antisionistas contra la ocupación y el apartheid. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tanya. We are done with all the presentations. First of all, really big thanks to Karen, Gabriela, Tura, Flavia, and Olivia, who are working on translation and are doing a really, really good effort for us to be able to do this activity and for everyone to be able to understand everything. Okay, so now the moment we've been waiting for. So we have here Erin Axelman. We want to welcome them, and say whatever you want to say to start, and then we can go to some questions and some talk.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. It's a true honor that so many of you have joined for a Sunday and that people are still using our film as a tool more than 2 years since it came out. I know a decent number of you because we've done a number of in-person screenings across Latin America, but we're always trying to do more and more. And we're really trying to help the different left-wing Jewish communities around the world expand themselves, increase their power, and hopefully we will see in our lifetimes a free Palestine and justice and freedom for all people who live between the river and the sea. So it's truly an honor to be here, and I'll answer any questions you'd like. I'm not shy. You can ask me anything you'd like. And seriously, thank you again so much for being here and for all of you for taking Palestinian freedom and rights so seriously and trying to use our Jewish experiences and our Jewish privilege to fight for Palestinian freedom.
Great. Juliana, do you want to start?
Sure. So once again, thank you, Erin, and everyone. So Erin, Israelism was launched, I think, in the beginning of 2023, right? Can you tell us a little bit the motivations that made you and Sam filming it? I think it was a process of many years. So if you can start saying like what was the main motivation and how it started.
Definitely. Yeah, so our film came out, as Juliana said, in February 2023, but it actually took us 7 years to make. So we began making Israelism in the beginning of 2016, and we began production, so we began filming in the summer of 2016, just a few months before Donald Trump was elected the first time. And Israelism is roughly based off my own story and my own story of transformation, and is even more closely based on the stories of many of my closest friends. I grew up in a very small Jewish community, and I really fell in love with the story of Israel, with the story of Zionism, when I was a little after my bat mitzvah. I was given a bunch of pro-Israel novels by many of my relatives, and as someone who had never known how to process the Holocaust, and for whom learning about the incredible oppression that Jews faced was always difficult to process, the story of Israel seemed like the light at the end of the tunnel. It seemed like after millennia of oppression, Israel was finally the place that Jews could be safe, where we could redefine ourselves, where we could be strong. And as a young kid who grew up in a largely Christian area and was really yearning for a positive Jewish identity, I really related to this, and it was incredibly empowering to me, and it made me interested in Judaism. Like many of the characters in the film, Israel was the modern story that really drew me to connect with my Jewish identity and made me feel connected to the larger Jewish community. But then, very randomly and luckily, I had a teacher in high school, a Irish teacher, who knew how left-wing my family was and who knew how left-wing I was and was just kind of shocked by how pro-Israel I was. And this was a teacher who loved me. I loved him. He was an incredible mentor of mine, and I really trusted him. And my senior year of high school, he asked me what seemingly a very simple question, but a question that really changed my life. He said, Erin, do you know anything about Palestinian history? And I began thinking about it, and he wasn't saying that I was a bad person. He wasn't admonishing me. He was just asking a basic question. And I began to realize that the books I was reading about Israel never talked about the Palestinians. And the books that I read about Zionism, or even the idea of Zionism, never mentioned the Palestinians. And you would think that all discussions of Zionism would, of course, include Palestinians, since they were the ones whose land the Zionist movement sought to take. But every definition of Zionism that I heard, every Zionist text I read, only mentioned the Palestinians as Arabs, if anything, and only mentioned them as an obstacle. It only viewed them as an obstacle towards the dreams of the Zionist movement, and never as equal human beings who understandably would not be very happy with European refugees coming into their land, not to live amongst them, but very specifically to take over their land. And as someone who grew up in North America, who grew up in an area where a massive genocide of Native Americans happened, I began to realize that the pro-Israel narrative was very similar to the American narrative. That the American narrative seeks to claim that America is this wonderful place, this new nation birthed of incredible ideals, a place for immigrants, a place where anybody could flee to. And that narrative is amazing until you hear about the Native Americans. And then you realize that that narrative is a dream. It's a dream that is only possible because of the nightmare that Native Americans have faced. And similarly, as I read more and more Palestinian historians, and I also read more and more left-wing Israeli historians. And it was actually really reading left-wing Israeli historians talk openly about the Nakba and the occupation that I realized that these phenomena were not anti-Israel propaganda, but very real events in Israeli and Palestinian history whose victims were still alive today. I met various friends in college whose parents and grandparents were Nakba survivors and who were still living in refugee camps because of the actions of the Zionist movement. And so although I began changing and I became quite anti-occupation in high school, the idea for Israelism in many ways came from my college experience. I went to a very left-wing university, but a university that had many, many Jewish students. Probably about 20% of the students were Jewish. And coming into college, I met all of these activists, these pro-Israel activists who truly thought that to be a good Jewish person, they had to fight for Israel. They had to defend Israel because it was a part of their identity. It wasn't even a political thing. It was literally a part of their identity, fighting for Israel and defending Israel. But like me in high school, they didn't know anything about Palestinian history, not even basic facts. And so inevitably, these pro-Israel students met Palestinians. They met Palestinian students. They had classes with Palestinian professors. They saw Palestinian lecturers. And they began to realize that even though they thought they knew so much about Israel, that Israel was the center of their identity, they knew nothing about Palestine, not even basic facts. And while some of them did become more pro-Israel and they became more defensive, the great majority of them actually were interested in learning. And over the course of my college career, I saw almost all the pro-Israel student leaders become pro-Palestinian. And seeing these incredibly, incredibly pro-Israel students become pro-Palestinian after coming into contact with Palestinian narratives made me realize that my story was part of a massive transformation occurring in the American Jewish community, as this formerly very pro-Israel community was becoming incredibly divided on the issue of Palestine, to the point where in 2021, so 4 years ago at this point, polling from the Jewish Electoral Institute in the US showed that in 2021, almost 40% of young American Jews, Jews under 40, thought Israel was an apartheid state. That's in 2021. That phenomenon has accelerated dramatically. Just about 2 months ago, polling from the Israeli government showed that 42% of Jewish teenagers, so young Jewish kids, thought Israel was committing a genocide in front of our eyes. The majority of American Jews want or are okay with cutting off weapons to Israel, at least until there is a ceasefire. So even though many pro-Israel organizations in the US, some of which we cover in the film, like AIPAC and the ADL, claim that essentially all American Jews support Israel, that is incredibly far from the truth. The American Jewish community is incredibly divided. And I do think at this moment, there are a majority of American Jews who believe in Palestinian freedom. And who believe in the equality of all people between the river and the sea. And so seeing this transformation, slowly increase over my childhood and adolescence and now explode and become really the defining story of American Jews is really what made me interested in making this film. And I think the reaction to our film, both the incredibly welcoming reaction from so many Jewish groups across the world, as well as the massive attacks that we've gotten from the far right, groups like the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, AIPAC, shows how common our story is, but also how dangerous our story is to the pro-Israel community. Because the pro-Israel community, a lot of their power comes from the narrative that all Jews support this, which is not true at all. And if we can show that a majority of Jews in America and in other parts of the world fully support Palestinian freedom, we can play a critical role undermining their narrative and undermining Western support for Israel. And sorry I talked a little fast. I'm working on it.
Thank you very much, Erin, for this first introduction. I'm going to speak a little bit slower so that our translators get some air. Let's do this. We're going to switch translators on each question. So right now, Karen will rest for a few minutes. And Gabriela, are you ready? Are you available? Great. So unmute yourself. And Flavia will rest for a little bit. And we'll go with Olivia. And over the next question, we'll do the other way around. And so that you can rest a little bit. I think we're doing well, but we don't want anyone to be burned out.
Just a reminder before the next question. We are recording this event, but everyone here is a safe space. So we are just recording to have a record, and the people that will appear, it's only who's speaking, just for everyone to be sure that it's a safe space. Thank you again.
Yeah, that's really important. Okay, so we're collecting questions via chat. Any question is welcome, as Erin is saying over the chat. Erin, you've done many Q&As, many question and answering about your film. We were wondering what has changed in the debates about the film in this year and a half. Do you notice a general change or something that slided over to some side in these 20 months of genocide, in their in people questioning or in their opinions about what's the general position or what's the tone of the questions? What do you see over these 20 months?
That's a great question. I would say, in general, the narratives that our film explores have become much more mainstream, I think, overall, to the point where, again, you're beginning to see, even centrist or right-wing commentators from around the world begin to describe Israel as an apartheid state and as a state committing genocide. One example is Piers Morgan, who is an absolutely horrible British journalist. And again, I hate Piers Morgan. He is the worst. But even he now agrees that what Israel is doing is a genocide. And again, I never would have thought, 20 years ago that a majority of American Jews would think that Israel is an apartheid state. And although we don't have great polling, it appears that probably about 50% of American Jews think Israel is an apartheid state. So I think the mass change that our film explores has accelerated dramatically since October 7th and since the genocide that began that day and in the days after. I will say that the attacks have probably become more intense, though, as well. So I would say the movement is expanding dramatically, not just amongst Jews around the world, but people like Piers Morgan and just moderates and, non-Jews, non-Palestinians. Seeing a genocide on your phone every day for almost 2 years is eventually going to make everyone change. And it's incredibly sad that a week of genocide didn't make people change. A month of genocide didn't make people change. A year of genocide didn't make people change. But slowly and slowly, as these images of starvation and these images of mass destruction, are on our phones over and over and over and over again, there has been a tipping point, it seems. And global opinion is turning against Israel in a very profound way. Polling in America for the first time ever shows that amongst all Americans support Palestinians more than they support Israelis for the very first time, which is a profound shift. Republicans, the right wing, still supports Israel far more, but most other demographic groups in the US support the Palestinian cause more than the Israeli cause. And I think it is this mass shift in global opinion which is making right-wing pro-Israel organizations, as well as the Israeli government itself, far more desperate and far more reckless, as well as far more dangerous. Before October 7th, I was only called an anti-Semite a handful of times. And again, calling me an anti-Semite is ridiculous. My family fled violent anti-Semitism in Europe. Our film is made by an almost entirely Jewish film team, including multiple Emmy and Peabody winning Jewish filmmakers. But after October 7th, the word anti-Semitism became thrown around so casually that the major attack against us was that we were anti-Semitic. And that attack, which obviously we talk about in our film, has become just so incredibly common. It, I think, has brought us into a dangerous new place. I think when people use that word to describe literally anything Israel does, even if it's things that key Israeli politicians and generals admit to doing, when you call anything Israel does anti-Semitic, or when you call any criticism of whatever Israel does anti-Semitic, people stop believing you. In English, we have this phrase, crying wolf. If you cry wolf over and over and over again, no one's going to believe you when the actual wolf comes. And I think what's so dangerous is that the pro-Israel right has thrown around that word so casually for so many years that many people across the world are beginning to not believe that anti-Semitism even exists. And when someone actually says something's anti-Semitic, they often think it's a joke. And that brings us to an incredibly scary place because when people no longer take anti-Semitism seriously, it can open up the doors for real anti-Semitism to thrive. So I think, and again, the ridiculousness of the pro-Israel attacks, again, have intensified. And also, again, I think Netanyahu's bombing of Iran, I think, is a clear reaction to the world beginning to shift against Israel. Netanyahu, right before Netanyahu began bombing Iran, France, Britain, and Canada were considering recognizing a Palestinian state. As global opinion shifts against Israel, Netanyahu is constantly trying to change the narrative and constantly trying to keep the West on his side because he sees how much Western and international support for Israel is dropping. So again, I think there are many, many good signs. I think global opinion and Jewish opinion are shifting dramatically. But as this global opinion shifts in favor of the Palestinian movement, I think the right wing and the Israeli government are going to get even more crazy and even more dangerous as they cling to the sinking ship, which is support for Israel.
Thank you, Erin. Well, it's quite frightening how we identify totally, or almost totally, with the stories of the protagonists and other people that appear in Israelism. It seems like even though we are in Brazil or Argentina or Mexico, are some base, a common base, a very common base of Zionist education. This being said, I have a question of how was the choice and interaction for the main protagonists of the movie? How do you get to know, like, did you have a previous relation, and how did you get to be inside those environments too?
Great question. Yeah, so I began doing pro-Palestinian activism in college. And I was kind of part of the kind of generation that began If Not Now. And so because I did pro-Palestinian activism in college, and a lot of the activism was from a Jewish place, so it was basically, left-wing Jews advocating for Palestine, some of my friends went on to become the founders of If Not Now, or I knew a lot of the founders through that work. So I had the idea for Israelism right around the time that If Not Now was forming. And I began going to the kind of local If Not Now meetings in Boston. And I began to see that this was this was really a growing movement that really spoke to the kind of stories and the transformations of young American Jews in particular. So I was very interested in them, and I began to realize that If Not Now could become, one of the central kind of, figures or groups in our film. And I heard about Simone for the first time because I had a friend in college who was friends with her and who had done some political activism with her. And so I'd known about her, and then I really heard about her when she was fired from the Bernie Sanders campaign. And that became a huge national news story in the US. Both the hiring of Simone was a huge deal, right? This was the most successful Jewish presidential candidate in American history, who was incredibly anti-occupation and who was hiring an anti-occupation Jewish activist to lead his Jewish outreach efforts. So just hiring her was a huge deal. And then literally within hours of Simone being hired, the right-wing pro-Israel community just went crazy. The idea that this major political figure would choose someone like Simone was incredibly terrifying to organizations like the ADL and AIPAC, especially because Bernie was Jewish, right? You have a Jewish candidate choosing young Jews who are pro-Palestinian as his staffers. And so when she was fired so quickly, I realized that this was first of all, that she was becoming this very important national figure, that this was a very interesting moment in American political history, both in terms of testing the boundaries of what was acceptable and what was possible in American politics, and then also seeing how powerful these right-wing organizations were in intimidating people, even people like Bernie Sanders, even people who are very strong and who stand up for their beliefs. So I met Simone through that, and we interviewed Simone and a number of other leaders from If Not Now. And I thought that she would be, a smaller character in the film. But the more I heard about her transformation and the incredible sacrifices that she has made, obviously, becoming a huge national figure at such a young age, and also, going through incredible conflicts with her own family and her own community, made me incredibly inspired by her story. As I became more pro-Palestinian, my parents very much came along with me. As I began to talk to my parents about the occupation and the Nakba, these were things that they didn't know about. And when I began talking to them about these things, they listened. And so it was actually a very easy process for me because I never had any real backlash from my family. Whereas Simone has had an incredible amount of backlash from her family, from her community, from her extended family. And so seeing the way that she kept pushing and kept fighting despite all these national figures hating her, besides her family, causing her so much grief, was incredibly inspiring. And also seeing the way that Simone was a storyteller, seeing the ways in which she explained her childhood as well as how she explained her transformation was incredibly impactful. And as we filmed with her more and more, we began to realize that we really wanted to make her the main character. And over time, we also realized that the best way to tell this story was actually to tell the entire story through Simone. So the entire kind of arc of the film, the structure of the film, is essentially the structure of Simone's life, right? Growing up, going to Jewish day school, becoming incredibly pro-Israel, going to college, meeting Palestinians, going to Palestine. And so we eventually realized that actually her story was the key story that we wanted to tell and that we also wanted to structure our film around. We actually only filmed with Eitan relatively late into the filming process, and we met Eitan at an event for Breaking the Silence. And I'm guessing a decent number of you know about Breaking the Silence. We obviously talk about Breaking the Silence a little bit in our film. And I am a big supporter of Breaking the Silence. During my college activism, my group brought Breaking the Silence members to campus many times. And I would say the two things that I have seen change American Jews the most has been meeting Palestinians and going to Palestine. And the other is meeting former Israeli soldiers who speak about the horrors of the occupation. And so, for example, one of the major things that made my co-director, Sam, change was seeing Breaking the Silence participants and soldiers at my college. And I think, so many American Jews and Jews across the diaspora, we idolize or we grow up idolizing the Israeli military. As Simone says in the film, Israeli soldiers are the pinnacle of Israeli identity to us. And they make us feel like we can be them, right? We can be as strong and as confident and kind of jokingly as hot, right, as Israeli soldiers, right? This is our way of becoming Israeli, is to become an Israeli soldier. And in college, I actually met a number of young American Jews who had just gotten back from the Israeli military. And seeing and learning about how they had been indoctrinated in such a profound way, but also was fascinating. What makes a kid from California, from suburban California, right, a privileged kid, decide to join a foreign military and literally become a foot soldier in one of the few systems of apartheid in the world? That's a crazy story. And so I became very fascinated by what makes American Jewish kids join the IDF. But also, seeing these kids in college who had just gotten back from the IDF, seeing them change made me realize that anyone could change. I knew two twins who had just gotten back from the IDF, and over the course of college, I began to see them become more and more pro-Palestinian as they kind of began to realize that they had been a cog in a system of literal apartheid. And one of those twins tragically passed away in a car accident. But the other one, proudly talks about how Israel is an apartheid state and spends, all of his waking hours fighting for Palestinian freedom now. And so realizing that, even soldiers could change made me realize that anyone could change. And I think Breaking the Silence is so important because they help break down this myth that so many of us have about the Israeli military. And if you can see that process of militarization, as well as that process of transformation from an Israeli soldier, it could be incredibly powerful to help Jews across the diaspora realize that this idea we have about the IDF, just like this idea we have about Zionism, is a myth. It's based on a dream. It's not based on reality. And so because, again, of the importance of seeing former soldiers change for us, we realized it could be very powerful to have a former soldier talk about what made him become a soldier in the Israeli military, and then what made him change. And that story, paired with a story like Simone's, could show kind of the ways in which a variety of American Jews who formerly supported Israel unconditionally were changing in a profound way. And so it has been difficult for Eitan. Eitan is not an activist. He's a regular person with a regular job. And so this has been a difficult process for him. And so I have incredible respect for him, for the vulnerability that he showed, and for his willingness to tell his story in our film.
Great. Thank you, Erin. So we're going to switch back for the translators. Thank you, Gabriela. Karen comes in again. And thank you, Olivia. Flavia comes in again for Portuguese. Erin, I'm going to read some of the questions we've been getting. We're trying to organize them so that your answers can take on many subjects as well at the same time. So let's see. First of all, how did you manage to get inside and film within the Zionist groups? I think it refers to the conversations inside the Hillel and other scenes. How did the Jewish American community react to the film? Did the film help you gain ground in previous Zionist sectors and get them to change their position? I think you have taken some reference to it on your previous answer. And what tactics did you use to achieve that? We'd like to know if you have any sense of how the documentary has been received, if it has, within the Israeli society. Do you have any idea of its reach or impact there, especially whether you have received feedback from anti-Zionist Jews living in Israel?
Great question. It wasn't my good looks and charm that convinced the Zionists to let me speak with them? No? Just kidding. You know, my favorite documentaries are documentaries that feature not just protagonists, but also antagonists, right? And, you know, I believe, right, in the idea of complex villains, right, that people are not two-dimensional people, and that, you know, seeing someone who is doing horrible things and actually seeing them talk and explain themselves can be very powerful for a variety of reasons. And so from the very beginning of making this documentary, one of the major goals was to interview people on the right, both in Israel and the US, and to really see them in an unfiltered way, and to kind of show people who are not in the Jewish community what this indoctrination is like. And, you know, because, you know, our team was basically entirely Jewish, and for the first, 4 years, it was just myself and my co-director. Both of us are obviously Jewish. And because we hadn't directed a film before, no one in the pro-Israel Jewish community really knew us. And no one really knew that we were pro-Palestinian. So what we would do is we would just email, people and say, hey, we're two young Jewish filmmakers making our first film ever about the important American-Jewish relationship to Israel. And that's really all we'd say, usually. We would never lie, but we would sometimes say things like, we spent a lot of time in Israel. We have many friends who were formerly part of the Israeli military, all of which is true. And we would let their assumptions help us, right? Many in the pro-Israel Jewish community really believe that almost all American Jews support Israel. That's obviously not true, but many really believe this. They believe that almost all Jews support Israel, and it's only a tiny percentage of crazy lefties who don't. So when we just said we're two young Jewish Americans making a film about Israel, they usually assumed that we were pro-Israel. We would never say we were pro-Israel, We would never say we were pro-Palestinian. We would just say, we are documentary filmmakers making a film about Israel. And many people said no, but many, many, many people said yes. And what we would do is we would actually, to get them to trust us more, we would actually send them the questions in advance so that they knew exactly what they would be talking about, because we were not trying to debate these right-wing Zionists. We were trying to get them to feel comfortable and to speak in an unfiltered way about essentially the indoctrination that they support. They don't see it as indoctrination, obviously, but I very much see it as indoctrination. So the questions we would ask would be like, why do you love Israel so much? Or why is it so important for young American Jewish kids to join the Israeli military? And obviously, you would think that they would catch on that we were seeing, how they, kind of indoctrinate kids to join a foreign military. But to them, these are very normal, positive questions. So again, we really let the assumptions of the pro-Israel community work against them. And we interviewed many, many people on the pro-Israel right. We did about 70 interviews for the film. The great majority of those interviews did not make it in the final film. But also, the more right-wing people we were able to interview, the easier it became to interview other right-wing people. Because we could then say, we're Jewish filmmakers making a film about Israel. We've interviewed this person, this person, this person, this person. Are you interested? So we were kind of able to build up trust within the pro-Israel community over a number of years, and then obviously, make this possible. Obviously, when the film came out, these people were incredibly angry with us, very, 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 very angry. But that was totally fine. We knew that would happen, and we prepared for it quite well. And actually, because we are very confident in the message of our film, we were totally fine with those people attacking us, and with using those attacks as a way of proving the merit of our film. So actually, the day our film came out, that it had its festival debut, we actually sent the full film to Abe Foxman, the main villain of the film, and said, hey, our film came out today. We would love to hear your thoughts. Hoping that he would attack us, because we felt that if he attacked us and we got into a debate with him, that we would win. And it took him about 3 months to attack us. He only began attacking us once the film got so big that he couldn't ignore it anymore. But we loved it. And when he attacked us, we used clips from his attacks in our promotional material. So again, we very much were willing to fight anyone. We were very confident in the message and the quality of our film. And we were willing to, use these fights as a way to have these public discussions in front of the world. And if someone wants to debate us about what Zionism is, we'll have that discussion at any point. So again, sometimes people say that, the way that we depict these pro-Israel organizations is not accurate. And I think that it is incredibly accurate. And I think the reason we were able to get into institutions as well is because our whole film team grew up in these institutions. I worked extensively with my Hillel when I was in college. I went on Birthright Israel. I have many friends who joined the Israeli military. Again, many people, on our film team, including Simone. Simone led Birthright trips. Again, one of our board members was the president of my Hillel when we were in college. So we knew these institutions very, very well, and we knew how they speak, and we knew their language. So we kind of knew how to convince them to let us interview them. And again, the woman the Hillel woman at UConn, her name is Jackie, who openly brags about how many kids she's gotten to join the Israeli military. She went on a podcast and said that we totally edited her footage out of context, especially the parts where she says that it's wonderful that she gets kids to join the Israeli military. And so we did a screening at her university, actually, and I just read her transcript of her interview word for word. And again, we don't edit her footage at all. And again, what she is saying is extremely normal. what she's saying, the people at My Hillel said, the people at Simone's Hillel said. And again, Abe Foxman, what he's saying, that's what he believes. And all the footage that we use of Jewish day schools is actually footage that those schools released online for free with a Creative Commons license as promotional material for their schools. We couldn't film in Jewish day schools because you can't film with kids who are under 18. But whenever people say that the kind of pro-Israel education we show is not accurate, I'm like, this is literally the promotional material that schools use to advertise themselves. Like, this is, if that's not real, why are they using it to advertise for their own schools? So yeah, and I would say, the American Jewish community, again, has reacted both in incredibly positive ways and in incredibly angry ways to us. Thousands of people have messaged us, have emailed us, telling us that they are so grateful for our film because it tells their story. It tells an incredibly common Jewish story that has still been a very nerve-wracking thing to live, a nerve-wracking story to live for so long. And so I think our film has helped give voice to so many left-wing American Jews who have felt this way for so long, but didn't necessarily have a community or didn't know how common the experience was. But right-wing Jewish organizations have totally freaked out about our film. I would say the number of screenings that people have tried to cancel is totally crazy. Some universities got over 50,000 emails from right-wing pro-Israel organizations demanding that they cancel screenings of our film, saying that our film was dangerous to Jews, that it was overtly anti-Semitic. Even a library, this tiny local library in Chicago, I think got 8,000 emails telling them to cancel the screening of their film. It was like a free screening. We're doing a free screening in a park in Chicago in 2 nights, and right-wing pro-Israel groups are trying to cancel that. So I think our film is incredibly, incredibly scary to pro-Israel organizations because those organizations are fueled by the conflation between Judaism and Zionism, right? Their entire purpose is to join those things together and to convince young Jewish people that to be Jewish is to support Israel. And our film is about separating those things and saying that, look, Judaism is a civilization that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Zionism is a political movement that's very young and that is based upon the expulsion and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And we do not have to affiliate ourselves with that to be Jewish. And in fact, I am horrified by Zionism because Zionism treats Palestinians like my family was treated in Europe. And I must fight against Zionism because Zionism has dehumanized Palestinians in profound ways that really remind me of the ways in which Jews have been dehumanized by Europeans for so long. So again, it's been amazing to see so much support, but it's also not surprising to see so much hate against us. But again, like we said, we are not afraid of conflict. We are not afraid of fights. And we're very excited when we're able to use our film as a way to have these fights in public because we're confident in our ability to win these arguments. And so we never shy away from a fight. Whenever someone tries to cancel a screening of ours, we fight back very aggressively every single time. And there has never been a single successful cancellation of our film ever. There's been many cancellations, but we've reversed every single one. Because again, we are very confident in the strength of our narrative and in the strength of our work.
Thank you, Erin. Olivia, Flavia, and the Spanish translator want to change. Just 1 minute. Sign me if you did. Flavia, Olivia? Okay. So Erin, thank you very much. It's amazing hearing from you about all this process. And I think you already answered Julia's question about how people reacted, how Zionist institutions and people reacted about being in the film. And it's very sensitive, the way that you approach. And now it's one of the biggest, I think, merits of the documentary, because you do not demonize. It's not about demonization. It's about going inside the narrative, inside this feeling. And about that, we have two questions here, one from Isadora and the next one from Les. So what do you think, what role did these years work of the organizations like JVP and If Not Now play in the contribution to this shift of consciousness within the US Jewish community? So we are talking about more than, I don't know, 15 years of work here in Latin America. Unfortunately, we had a rupture with our dictatorships about non-Zionist, anti-Zionist movements. So what do you think the recent story of United States? And Les asked, given that so many Jews have fallen in love with the story of Israel, what have been some emotional roots for abandoning the story? What did you feel about those reactions and people coming to tell? And moreover, for becoming pro-Palestine activists. So transforming this kind of rupture feeling to a more activist feeling or more pronouncing itself feeling. I don't know if I'm clear.
Great question. Yeah, Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now have played a crucial role in moving the American Jewish community to the point where it is now. And Jewish Voice for Peace probably has played the more even important role because they formed in the late 90s, I believe, when these conversations were still very, very uncommon in public. These conversations were, of course, happening in private. Many, many Jews that I talked to, including my own family members, say that they always knew something was wrong with how Israel treated the Palestinians. But because there was so little public discourse, especially in the Jewish community, these conversations still felt impossible, or at the very least, they felt incredibly nerve-wracking and even dangerous if you wanted to be part of your community, right? The norms of the American Jewish community, especially from 1967 till about the year 2000, was based on support for Israel. Support for Israel was in many ways the glue that tied together many American Jewish communities. And so if you began challenging the dominant narrative, there was the chance you would be thrown out of your community, that you would lose your community, lose your friends, even lose your family. And I think why Jewish Voice for Peace was so important was that they created this public space that normalized criticizing Israel and built community around criticizing Israel. And I think all of us need community. All of us need a home. And it is a very nerve-wracking thing to potentially lose your community because of your political beliefs. And that's, again, why I respect Simone so much, because she went through far more sacrifices than I did. My transformation was much easier because my family members were changing with me, and I never had to lose community because of that. And I think Jewish Voice for Peace is important not only because they created this infrastructure, this left-wing Jewish infrastructure over so many decades, but they also helped create a critical conversation about what Zionism is. There were other groups that were critical of Israel, but still weren't critical of Zionism. And I think Jewish Voice for Peace was the first major US Jewish group to really begin questioning Zionism and begin talking about what Zionism means to Palestinians. I think many of us, especially many liberal Zionists, are kind of caught up in the dream of Zionism, right? They want to believe that Zionism could be this humanistic thing, but from the standpoint of Palestinians, Zionism has always meant displacement, ethnic cleansing, and dehumanization. Always. If you ask Palestinians what Zionism means to them, it means losing their homes, it means military occupation, it means apartheid. And so again, although many people want to believe that Zionism is this kind of, theoretical thing that's just about Jewish self-determination and about Jewish peoplehood, Zionism has always only been possible because of the displacement of Palestinians. No definition of Zionism that I've ever heard really thinks of Palestinians as fully equal human beings. Most definitions of Zionism don't even mention Palestinians, which is insane considering that, again, Zionism is predicated on taking land where Palestinians were living. And I think Jewish Voice for Peace has done an incredible job showing that, again, even though we might want to believe that Zionism could be this wonderful thing, it has never been wonderful for Palestinians. It has been a nightmare. And again, I think the dream and nightmare analogy is quite good, and that Zionism was a dream for us, a dream of self-determination, of redefinition, but it was only possible by creating a nightmare for Palestinians. And I think Jewish Voice for Peace has done a great job of that, of helping normalize that conversation. And I think If Not Now has done an incredibly important job, especially in the last decade. And I think the two groups work very well together. Jewish Voice for Peace is explicitly anti-Zionist. If Not Now is not. They are open to any discussions of Zionism, and they do a great job discussing what Zionism means, but they're a bit more big tent. And I am a believer in the entire Jewish left. I think all these different organizations, whether they are explicitly anti-Zionist or not, are all incredibly important in slowly shifting the American Jewish community towards being pro-Palestinian. And I am not a Zionist, but the word actually, whether you're a Zionist or anti-Zionist, doesn't mean that much to me. It matters more what you're doing, right? Are you taking active steps to make Palestine free? Are you taking active steps to reduce your country's complicity in Israeli war crimes? And so again, I think If Not Now is very important in getting people into the movement. Some of them will stay with If Not Now. Others will move further left to JVP. But I think creating an ecosystem of organizations on the Jewish left is incredibly important. And I'm individually not like a member of any of these groups, but I support all of them as a whole. And I think when it comes to the second part of the question about the story, right? Falling in love with that story. And again, I think one of the reasons why we didn't want to demonize the right-wing characters in the film is that all of us believed that story as well at one point, right? I thought about joining the Israeli military. I didn't take active steps to do it. I don't think I really would have, but I fantasized about it. I thought it was an amazing thing to do. So I very much understand why people fall in love with that story, because I fell in love with that story myself. And I think what we need to do is be able to show people that that story is just a story. It is not based in reality, but also empathizing with people's desire for that story, right? That story, and the reason why we want that story is because we have been oppressed for so long. We Jews have faced we have been weak for so long. It makes sense why we want strength, why we want to be able to be masters over our own fate. But again, I understand where that desire comes from. But the problem is that, again, the story of Israel simply never talks about Palestinians. And it never in any way really acknowledges the way in which the Israeli experience has caused so much horror for Palestinians. So I think the ways in which I've seen people change is, again, one of the biggest ones, as I talked about before, was actually talking with left-wing Israelis. I think left-wing Israelis are incredibly important. They are obviously a very small proportion of the population, but because so many Jews in the diaspora, I idealize Israelis actually talking with Israelis, left-wing Israelis, about what Zionism means to them, how Israel is actually not a very safe place for Jews, and also how they have seen the oppression of Palestinians is incredibly important. One of the things that made Simone change was meeting anti-Zionist Israelis. And growing up, she thought that anti-Zionist Israelis didn't even exist. She thought that was, even the idea of being an anti-Zionist Israeli didn't even make sense. And when she got to college, one of her professors, or I think maybe he was a postdoc, was an anti-Zionist Israeli. And, she would go to him and say, these people are calling Israel a settler colonial state. How can you stand for this? And he was like, well, settler colonialism is a sociological term that simply means people come from one place to another to not live amongst those people, but to take over that land. And he's like, that's what my grandparents did, right? He's like, I am just being honest about the country I live in, and seeing, Israelis as real people as opposed to these kind of fairy tale icons of Zionism, I think oftentimes is incredibly important. And so I think, seeing left-wing Israelis, seeing people from breaking the silence, and for me, again, it was actually reading left-wing Israeli historians that was more important for me than reading Palestinian historians, because I idolized Israel so much that if an Israeli was saying it, well, it can't be fake because an Israeli is saying it. So that was, I think, very important. And then also, I think, one of the most scary parts is that, so many, like Simone says, she thought she knew so much about Israel, but she realized she knew nothing about Palestine. And I think there is a reason why these pro-Israel organizations try to make it impossible for young Jewish people to meet Palestinians, right? For example, even Hillel International literally has something called the Standards of Partnership, which say that groups affiliated with Hillel are not allowed to interact with groups that delegitimize Israel, which essentially means all Palestinian groups, most Arab groups, most Muslim groups, etc. And it really puts you in a bubble in which you simply never meet Palestinians, because they are terrified of what happens when you actually meet Palestinians. Because when young American Jews actually meet Palestinians, they realize that Palestinians live under an apartheid system, that Palestinians live their entire lives controlled by a government that does not represent them and does not have to represent them. And I think, again, many of us believe in this dream of Israel, and that dream of Israel is a dream, it's a liberal dream. It's a dream in which people have rights. And when people actually meet Palestinians and begin to understand the daily nightmare that Palestinians live through every single day of their lives, that is incredibly important in helping to shatter that myth. The problem is that many American Jews simply don't meet Palestinians. And so getting Palestinians into these spaces and getting Palestinian narratives into these spaces is incredibly important. And that's why, obviously, our film is about American Jews, but we wanted to make sure that, we talked a lot about the Nakba and the occupation, so that people who were, more pro-Israel, if we managed to get our film in front of them, they would be exposed to Palestinian narratives, and we could hopefully begin that shift. And again, for me, I was already very anti-occupation in college, but meeting my first Palestinian friend, who grew up in Ramallah, and hearing about what it was like to live under an apartheid system and the daily indignities of having to go through checkpoints and having Israeli military surround your city and having walls surround your city, I almost didn't believe it, right? I was already anti-occupation, but what she was describing was so horrible, I almost didn't believe it. But it made me question, it made me curious, and it made me want to go myself. All these Palestinians were telling me how horrible it was, and that really made me want to go myself. And so in 2011, when I was 21, I spent about 3 months in Israel and the occupied West Bank. And even though I was not really a Zionist even before, seeing it with my own eyes shattered the last vestiges of that dream for me, and really brought me to the place where I am right now, and motivated me to do the work that I've done for many years at this point.
Great. Thank you, Erin. We're going to make a small pause to change again for translators. If you want Olivia to go back to Flavia, and Gabriela steps out, and Tura, you have to start your microphone and start talking now. Let's see if people can hear you. Okay, so people hearing in Spanish, we're okay? Okay, great. So, Erin, you've mentioned what was the effect on Simone meeting anti-Zionist Israelis and the importance of these groups within the Israeli society. But the previous question, and I want to insist because people are insisting over the chat, is to if there were any reactions to the documentary itself within the Israeli society, if you got any feedback or if you got any comments or attacks or anything. I'm seeing some other questions associated with that, since we're talking about the Israeli society. Fernando asks, could it be said that the role of the Israeli citizens in the face of the Palestinian genocide reflects a contemporary form of the banality of evil, a concept by Hannah Arendt, in which the population, far from being uninvolved, acts as an active or indifferent supporter of criminal policies legitimized by the state? And I want to ask you to go really slow on this one.
Yes, sounds great. Yeah, we have done a number of screenings in Israel. We were actually planning on doing a tour in Israel before October 7th, but decided to not do that after October 7th. There are many people in Israel who support us and who love our film and who have told us that the indoctrination that we show in our film reminds them of the indoctrination that they themselves faced. And the indoctrination that Israelis face is much more intense than the indoctrination that American Jews face, especially the military indoctrination. But despite the fact that it is more intense, many Israelis have told us that it is shockingly similar, and they see many similar patterns in the ways that they were raised. And again, I very much support the Israeli left. And just like it was important to have a white left wing in South Africa, so that when apartheid ended, there were partners to work with, I think it's very important to have a strong left in Israel, so that if the apartheid system ever ends, there are Israeli partners that can be part of that peace process. We also know that the Israeli government has been very threatened by our film. One of the major shocking moments for us when we began rolling out our film was finding out that actual Israeli consulates throughout the US were trying to cancel screenings of our film. We first found that out in June of 2023, so about 5 months before October 7th. We were doing our first college screening at UCLA in California, and we found out that the LA Israeli consulate, the representative of the Israeli government, was actively trying to cancel the screening. And the Israeli consulate in San Francisco also tried canceling our screening at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. So finding out that the Israeli government itself was not only aware of our film, but was spending some portion of its time fighting our film, was a little scary to us, but also was very affirming, because it showed us that our film was powerful enough to make the literal Israeli government scared. And that was incredible for us. Just like when, finding out that the ADL and these other organizations were organizing against the film, it was scary, but it was exactly what we wanted to hear, because we knew that if our film was successful, it would get a response from these, large pro-Israel organizations, including the Israeli government. Hillel International as well also banned our film from playing in any Hillels, which was pretty cool. We actually got one Hillel actually agreed to show the film. It was the Hillel at Yale, and each Hillel is independent, but also is controlled by Hillel International. And actually, the adult board members of this Hillel voted to screen our film because our film tells the story of many of their students, and they agreed to do it. And then 2 days later, the head of that Hillel told the head of Hillel International they were planning to screen our film, and he told them that if he screened our film, he would lose his job and their funding would be cut. And he immediately canceled the screening, and we did the screening across the street. But finding out that all these pro-Israel organizations were so threatened by a film was, again, strange, but really told us that we were on to something, that our story of that being able to demonstrate the how and the why of this massive transformation was incredibly threatening to these pro-Israel organizations, because this transformation that we are showing is their worst nightmare, right? Their worst nightmare is young pro-Palestinian Jews. Just like Abe Foxman says in the film, right? The young kids, we lost them, right? That is their greatest nightmare, that they are going to lose the entire generation of young American Jews. And our film has played a role, unclear how large, in move along and to help explain that transformation and that trajectory. The question, so again, it's, I would say most Israelis probably, hate us, and obviously the Israeli government hates us. But it has been encouraging that we have gotten many individual Israelis welcoming our film and hosting screenings of our film and saying that they are in solidarity with us. When it comes to the question of Israeli society and the banality of evil, that's a very good question. I mean, very sadly, many, I think, liberal Zionists and many kind of centrists like to believe that Netanyahu is an aberration, that Netanyahu is not representative of Israeli society, but he is. Netanyahu, unfortunately, is incredibly representative of Israeli society, and that is why his government and governments like his keep getting voted in over and over and over and over again. And even the last government that was not a Netanyahu government was partially led by a settler who is even more far-right, Bennett, than Netanyahu. So very sadly, Israeli society is incredibly right-wing, and ironically, as the diaspora Jewish community becomes more and more left-wing, Israeli society is becoming more and more right-wing. Polling from just a few weeks ago in Haaretz shows that over 80% of Israelis support the full ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. That is a heinous war crime. Any kind of ethnic cleansing is a war crime of the highest order. And as people who ourselves experienced ethnic cleansing throughout our history, it is shocking to me that so many Israelis openly support such a heinous war crime. Again, I often talk about, we Jews were ethnically cleansed from Palestine by the Romans 2,000 years ago, and we still talk about it every single day. Right? Ethnic cleansing is a major part of our history, and the crime of ethnic cleansing has been used against us so many times. It is a shame beyond belief that so many Jewish people, especially in Israel, not only are okay with mass ethnic cleansing, but are celebrating mass ethnic cleansing in such a horrific way. I think there's many reasons why Israeli society is like it is. I think one major reason for that is that I think because of the guilt that many Western countries felt of the Holocaust, and because ending the Holocaust is a major part of many Western countries' narratives, these countries have let Israel break international law for decades and decades and decades. International law essentially has not applied to Israel, at least since 1967. And so when Israel keeps getting away with breaking international law over and over and over and over and over again, they think they can get away with it. And they're probably right, right? Again, Israeli settlements are a heinous war crime, right? The UN has passed laws very clearly stating what colonization is and how it is obviously a war crime. Israeli settlements have been expanding in a pretty linear way for over 50 years, every single year. And Israel keeps getting away with it with no consequences. And so when there's no consequences for such heinous war crimes over and over and over again, Israeli society has come to believe that they can commit war crimes and that they'll get away with it, which again, very sadly, they have been getting away with it so far. And so it is incredibly terrifying that within just 2 generations of people who experienced genocide at such a horrific level are now so openly committing a genocide and are such enthusiastic participants in a genocide. And it makes me incredibly scared for the future of Israeli society. That such a huge majority of Israelis are okay or willing enthusiasts for ethnic cleansing and genocide.
Thank you very much, Erin. Now we're going to switch back translators. Thank you, Gabriela. Now comes Karen. And thank you, Flavia. Now comes Olivia in the Portuguese translation. Are you okay? Again, thank you everyone for being here. If there's any problem, please sign us in the chat. Next question is, I'm gonna gather three of them, I guess. Well, is this a conscious choice about talking more or saying more the word Israelism rather than Zionism in the movie? Here in Brazil, when we exhibited the film, in some Palestinian cultural centers and activists, they already were asking about that. So is this I imagine it's a conscious choice, but to let us know why and how did you manage to think about this? Together with this, a question of how was the reaction of Palestinians? Like, your friends are not friends. I think the film is really happy to talk about the Zionism and Jewish question without saying for the Palestinians. So you invite Palestinians to choose, and you already said about this narrative, and to listen, to have this kind of delocation, right? You deloc yourself as a spectator. So a little bit about this. And Silvio asked, well, while it's again having the Jew diaspora in the U.S. recognize the injustice against the Palestinians. Wouldn't it? Do you feel it's limited to this two-state solution? I personally don't believe in any solution in which there is some form of survival of Zionism. So Silvio asked about it. So you have this Israelism term, reaction of Palestinian people, and this two-state feeling about non-Zionist or left Zionist. I don't know if you feel this kind of environment that feels diverse, but it's actually normalizing Palestinian situation, I think. Thank you again.
Great questions. Yeah, so when it comes to the title, Israelism was not the initial name that I chose. I initially chose a really long, not very good title. It was called 70 Years Across the Sea. It was very bad. Talking about the kind of distance between the American and Israeli Jewish communities. But then my director, thank God, was like, yo, Erin, it's a terrible name. Good idea for a film, but you got to change the name. And I asked other people, and they were like, yeah, it's not very good. And so I was like, okay, I got to come up with a new name. So we were really trying to come up with a very short name, 1 to 3 words, that really tried to get at the thesis of our film. And the thesis of our film is that Israel has kind of replaced Judaism as the core of American Jewish identity, right? Or at least that's what it was in the past, and it's changing now. But showing this very strong connection between Israel and Judaism. And so I think I had someone in one of our interviews said pro-Israelism at one point. So I didn't come up with the term. And if you search the word Israelism, if you searched it before 2023, it was a term that was used on the right and the left occasionally to kind of talk about this kind of obsession with Israel. Sometimes people think of that obsession as a good thing, but it kind of described that obsession. And so we chose that term because, again, it seemed like it was a very clever way of talking about that obsession with Israel, to the point where support for Israel actually kind of becomes the civil religion of American Jews, right? What keeps American Jews Jewish? It's not the Torah, it's support for Israel. Support for Israel for the past couple of decades really was the main thing that bound Jewish communities in the US together. Many American Jews are secular. Many American Jews do not believe in God, but they believe in Zionism. They believe in Israel, and support for Israel is so important to them that it really almost becomes a religion to them. So Israelism was kind of the idea of Israel replacing Judaism. So the combination of Israel and Judaism, that was part of the idea. The other idea, as you talked about, was that we were trying to make a film about Zionism, but in the US, whenever you say the word Zionism, people freak out, especially on the right. If you make a film that explicitly is critical of Zionism, you're all of a sudden not going to be able to reach a very large amount of people. So we were also trying to be a bit clever and a bit mysterious by creating a name that would make people ask, what is this about, right? What is Israelism? So we were kind of trying to be a little bit mysterious and make a film about Zionism that didn't actually use the word Zionism. So our film is obviously about Zionism, but we only use the word Zionism one single time in the entire film. And the idea is to get people to think about Zionism and what Zionism means without the emotional baggage of using that word. Because we felt that if we used that word in the very beginning and made it a film that was a debate about Zionism, we were going to lose an entire portion of the community that gets very triggered whenever you criticize Zionism. So we were trying to kind of be clever, be a little bit mysterious, but then also make a film. We really wanted to reach conservative pro-Israel people. So we also thought that by kind of making a somewhat mysterious name and maybe even making a name that some people might think was pro-Israel would be a way of getting our film into places that pro-Palestinian films often aren't able to get into. And that was also part of the reason why we chose to have the first part of the film be like it is. The first part of the film makes it seem kind of like a pro-Israel film, at least a little bit, right? You kind of see the pro-Israel indoctrination or education of the main characters. So we also wanted to make a film that wouldn't scare off people in the middle, that would obviously be super far left. Obviously, our film is very, very far left, but would kind of ease people into the film and not kind of smack them in the face immediately. And these were all very difficult decisions to figure out. And it took us many years to figure out how to tell that story and how to kind of, again, ease people into the story and make them realize slowly that something crazy was going on, and to make them realize that this pro-Israel, this is not a pro-Israel film. This is a film about, again, pro-Israel indoctrination. It's been pretty cool. We've now kind of, Israelism is kind of a term now to a certain extent. It's kind of this, again, this idea about the worship of Israel. Zionism was the idea of the creation of a Jewish state. Israelism, maybe, is this idea of, again, Israel being this kind of God for us, right? To the point where criticizing Israel for many American Jews is tantamount to criticizing Judaism, to criticizing your own religion. Some American Jews are so obsessed with Israel, they can't even deal with basic criticisms based in fact. And so it's been really interesting to get to kind of help create this term or help normalize this term. And very exciting, we're actually going to be creating a TV show podcast with Simone, probably called the Israelism Project. That's going to be on Mehdi Hassan's news agency, Zateo. That's going to start in September, which is very exciting. So we're not publicizing that. We're filming it now. The first episode will be in September, and he wants Mehdi Hassan wants us to call it the Israelism Project because he sees a lot of value in the way that term can open up discussions about the role of Israel in American Jewish life, and the role of Israel in our identities. And the last question about the two-state solution, again, I support whatever solution Palestinians support. Palestinians are the ones that have been suffering under Zionism, and so ultimately, I'm cool with any solution that gives equal rights to all, that supports the right of return for Palestinians, and that people in the region are okay with. At one point, there were many Palestinians who were okay with a two-state solution. Many have always been opposed to a two-state solution. At this point, a two-state solution is simply not going to happen. Whether or not it was a good idea or wasn't a good idea, I've always supported, or at least for a very long time, I've supported a one-state solution. I very much support a one-state solution now. Great majority solution. But to me, the specific solution is less important than the guarantee of rights and the guarantee of Palestinian refugees' right of return. those two things are the most important thing to me. What specific solution comes to pass is a little less important to me than the guaranteeing of those rights and the guaranteeing of the Palestinian right of return. But again, yeah, even a two-state solution, again, was based on ethnic cleansing, right? Even 1948, the creation of the initial Israeli state before 1967 was still based upon ethnic cleansing. So even though, again, what's happened since 67 has been truly horrific and has been over a half century of apartheid, we must always recognize that the crimes against the Palestinians did not start with the occupation, that almost 1 million Palestinians were driven from their homes, and their descendants are now 5 million people. And those 5 million people deserve to come to their homes. And again, they are never going to forget. Again, as I talked about before, we Jews have not forgotten being ethnically cleansed 2,000 years ago, right? I know Palestinians who are Nakba survivors, who were driven from their homes when they were children. They are never going to forget. Their children are never going to forget. Their grandchildren are never going to forget. And so also, to actually bring peace to the region, to make Jews in that land safer, we must create a long-term solution that gives Palestinians equal rights and creates a right of return, because otherwise Israelis are not going to know peace, right? And so again, my desire for a one-state solution comes obviously primarily because I want equal rights for Palestinians, but I also want to ensure that all people in that land can have equal rights. And a one-state solution seems to be the most realistic and simplest way to achieve those rights and to achieve justice for all people who live in that land.
Great. Thank you, Erin. We're getting closer to the end of this talk. We just have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much, Karen, for your collaboration. Gabriela, are you there to continue? Great. And if Flavia and Olivia want to switch back. Okay, so Erin, final questions, and then we'll make a closure. Are you aware? Yael asks, are you aware of Aki Or's work, Israelism as a new core of identity for Jews who were not religious and had therefore no positive feature for their identity? Was one of these theses back in the 70s. And also, another question: do you think Israelism also helps prevent people from becoming settlers or moving to Israel? And finally, if you had to make the documentary again, or if you had to do it now, what would you do differently?
And what was that academic's name again?
Aki Ors. I'll send it to you later on. Maybe Yael can. Okay, Les is giving us here a link for some text. If you're not familiar with that, you can just read it afterwards, and then if not, you can get back to us with that one.
Fascinating. I actually didn't know. Yeah, I actually didn't know about this author. But yeah, there's been a lot of different authors. So even though we helped kind of coin the term Israelism, the idea of this we did not come up with by any means. There's been a lot of academics, especially the last few decades, who have talked about this kind of peculiar American-Jewish relationship with Israel and this kind of obsession that many American Jews have with Israel that has made Israel into kind of the civil religion of our people. There's a really great academic named Dov Waxman, who has a book called, I think, Trouble in the Tribe, which kind of goes over that idea. And then also Sarah Ann Minkin, who's one of the academics in our film Israelism. She, in her academic work, has talked about that a lot. So we were very inspired by a lot of different academics, both Jewish and Palestinian, who for quite a long time had kind of, in an academic way, talked about this kind of strange centering of Israel in American Jewish life. And we were inspired to make a film about it because we realized that the sociological phenomena was super interesting, but also the personal stories of indoctrination and transformation could help elevate these academic ideas and help bring these ideas to a larger audience. So by showing the personal stories of how American Jews fell in love with Israel and how we told ourselves that story, as well as how that story has unraveled for us, that was really kind of what we felt we could be our unique contribution. And actually, earlier cuts of Israelism, because again, we started in 2016, the very early cuts of Israelism were much more history-based. They were much more about kind of the history of the American-Jewish relationship to Israel and a lot about how that relationship came into being. And it's really fascinating the ways in which that kind of special relationship came into being, especially in the 60s and 70s. So it makes sense that this came out in the early 80s. Because yeah, this kind of relationship, this kind of Israelism, the idea of Israelism really kind of came into being in the US, I would say probably, in the 60s and 70s. So that makes a lot of sense, and I'll definitely read that. Does Israelism help people not become settlers? That's a good question. I mean, I think in general, no one piece of art is going to fundamentally change someone. But I think an individual piece of art can make people question things for the first time and can help them get down the path they are on now. So for example, for me, it was a book that made me a Zionist initially. It was the book Exodus by Leon Uris, which is kind of a classic pro-Israel, Zionist novel that really tells the story of Israel, of Zionism, in a incredibly inspiring, incredibly empowering way. And it was based on that story. So it was really the story of Zionism, not the facts of Zionism, the story of Zionism that really made me so attracted to it. And it was also books, especially by left-wing Israeli historians, that made me anti-Zionist. So I do believe in the power of media and the power of books and films to change people. It's usually, again, though not one piece of film or book that will do that, but if you catch someone at the right time in their life, one piece of art can impact them in a very profound way. I think the book, I think our film has impacted individuals most when they're already primed, right? When they're already kind of beginning their journey and need a little bit of extra push. So, from, what we've heard is, our film has changed people the most, usually like, older college students who grew up very pro-Israel are just beginning to realize something is off. Then they see our film and it really, really affirms what they've already been thinking. Occasionally, we've heard that our film is like the first time that people have ever even heard Palestinian narratives. And hearing about the Nakba for the first time often has made people just totally change. So I think our film, we have heard examples of our film profoundly changing people and being the thing that really gets them going. But I think more often it's a tool that gets them further along their path. If they were beginning to question, it makes them question even more. If they were already questioning, it affirms what they were beginning to question and makes them want to do this work more. If they were doing this work, but it was feeling lonely, this film can help them show that there are communities they can be a part of. But I do think, again, our film does a good job of cutting through the dream and showing that this dream is very much that, and that it is not based in reality. And I think, again, it is the dream that makes people make Aliyah. Again, in the very opening scene of our film, a guy at the Birthright mega event, a guy says, "I was on Birthright 2 months ago. I just got back. I'm in the army. I'm Israel High," right? He doesn't know anything about Israeli history, this guy, right? He's a 19-year-old kid from America, but he fell in love with the dream, and that dream is very powerful. So I think our film has done a good job. If you see Israelism, it's a little harder to believe in that dream. And so I do think that it probably has helped some people maybe not make Aliyah or not become settlers, but it's hard to know. And again, it's hard to know the impact of one single piece of art. And our film is part of many, many, many other films and many, many other books by both left-wing Jews and Palestinians that has led us to this moment. And if it wasn't for JVP and if it wasn't for If Not Now, we wouldn't be here. And so everything builds upon itself. And yeah, and someone asked a question in the chat, the list of books by left-wing Israelis. I would say the one book that really made me question at first was a book called 1967 by Tom Segev. And Tom Segev is a very interesting guy. Up until very recently, he still considered himself a Zionist, I think, a left-wing Zionist. But in the past few months, he's done interviews saying that he's like, I've begun to realize that Zionism was probably not a good idea from the start. And so even these people who have been anti-occupation but have still clung to the dream of Zionism, that is now beginning to shatter. And again, I think it is the genocide that is making it shatter. You know, if you see people for 2 years say, I am a Zionist, what Zionism means to me is destroying Gaza, that is turning off a lot of people, luckily. And so, again, in many ways, Zionism is digging its own grave. Zionism has become so extreme, and Zionists are dehumanizing Palestinians so much that many people who still thought of themselves as Zionists are now beginning to realize that if this is what Zionism means, if this is where Zionism has led to genocide in Gaza, then I myself cannot be a Zionist. So really, really great questions. And again, thank you all so much for being here. It's an honor that people are connecting with our film. Again, we decided to make our film fully free many months ago. So it's free on Al Jazeera, it's free on Vice, it's free on Tubi, Roku, many other services. You can now also subscribe to Watermelon Plus, which is the streaming service from our distributor, Watermelon Pictures. They have an incredible library of Palestinian films and films on Palestine. Israelism is one of them. There's different licenses in different countries. So, for example, in Chile, if you subscribe, you still have to pay for Israelism. I'm not sure why. So again, I don't know what the streaming service is like in every country, but it's also a really great resource, which is really, really wonderful. And they've been doing a lot of really incredible films. They just made the film The Encampments, which Mahmoud Khalil is part of, which is very exciting. And again, I'm so grateful to all the different groups who helped organize this. And again, our dream was to help, make Israelism a tool that different left-wing Jewish groups around the world could use. And it means so much to us that you're using our film as a tool. And thank you so much for what you're doing. And again, the movement is growing. Not soon enough, but the movement is growing.
We are sure about that, Erin. Again, thank you very much. I think I and everyone here would like to thank you for talking and being available for us here. I think that one of the things that our collective, and I think our other collectives here, is that in addition to acting together in the front for Palestine liberation struggle, talking about BDS, boycott, and pressuring our governments against complicity, our collectives are also spaces for absorbing a deep identity crisis that I think Israelism in a magnificent way touches. So we are here remembering also that we are spaces that are able to create belonging, and this belonging, and to combat, like, not agree with the belonging of Israelism and Zionism in our community. So I'm here now talking to everyone for us to not stop talking about Palestine, for us to do difficult and conflictual chats with our families and friends. And we are really important to this current horrible scenario that we are living, to continue speaking, and speaking not in our name every day, every single day, because we are important for that. There is a genocide and ethnic cleansing project being streaming live in our names, and we have this duty, I think we can call that. We called a compromise about everyone's liberation, everyone's justice, memory, and freedom rights. So thank you very much, Erin. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Our translators, to have the patience and the calm to do this work with us. I think, as Isadora said right now, we're not be silent until Palestine is free. So thank you. I don't know if Ivan and anyone want to say anything. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Erin. And just follow us on Instagram or any social media. I sent the links over the chat a few minutes ago. And stay tuned because we're going to do some more activities like this, hopefully in Spanish or Portuguese all the way. But and please make sure to contact us if you had any questions that weren't answered or something, and we'll pass them on to Erin, and we'll hopefully get the video of this on YouTube so that if anyone missed it or missed a part of it, can get to hear it. So I hope you all had a great time here. I know we did, and let's keep up the fight.
Right. And again, thank you to the translators. Again, the translators were amazing. Great job. And again, thank you all. And again, thank you, Ivan. Thank you all the amazing organizers. It means so much to me. And let me know how I can help. Again, I'm here to help, and let us know how we can, elevate your work in whatever way we can.
Great. All right, everyone. We'll stop the recording.